The New Orleans Saints must consider options, including Alvin Kamara trade with a 2-5 record. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Rodney Harrison, Mike Florio from Pro Football Talk on NFL on NBC. We are in this world now where, I mean, you talk about life comes at you fast, huh? Two games into the season, Saints were NFC title hopefuls, NFC South division hopefuls. A few weeks later, the Saints are in a rebuild. The Saints are in, hey, fire Dennis Allen, trade Alvin Kamara, trade whoever, Chase Young, cut this player, cut that player, play for the future. And it's a harsh reality. I wish I could sit up here and say that, well, hold on. We still have time. It's not really there yet, but I can't. I can't sit here and say that. So, you do have to have these conversations, and I do think you have to consider all options. I mean, the front office, this is when the front office has to do their job, is when you're at a crossroads and the franchise is going one direction when it's built to go the other direction. So it's going to be ugly. I think it's going to be a bumpy ride, but I think you got to start now. I mean, you have to. I don't think anybody who isn't literally ODing on hopium and copium, I don't think anybody can rationally look at this team and say, no, I mean, we'll get it back on track. Like, I have no evidence that supports that. Absolutely none. I mean, the injuries are bad. The injuries aren't on the defensive line. The injuries aren't giving up 7 yards rushing per game to the likes of Javonte Williams and Sean Tucker. Okay, so the team is broken. The culture is broken. It is what it is. So we absolutely have to be having these conversations of who can be moved and what money can be saved.
I said this yesterday, Rodney, and I feel more strongly about it today. Alvin Kamara is in the last year of his contract with the Saints. He's an asset that they can use to get draft pick or two to reload for the future. If he's not going to be there next year under his current contract, now you can still work out a revised contract, but there's no way they're keeping him under his current contract next year. He's a guy you have to at least, and we know the phone rings. These GMs talk to each other all the time to see who's available and who's not. When the phone rings, you got to at least see what they're going to offer. They should consider trading him. They should consider trading him.
Mike, they should consider trading Alvin Kamara. They should consider trading Marshawn Lattimore. They have to dump the salary of some of these big guys. And I think Cam Jordan, I think we're going to see Cam Jordan on TV next year. I think he's going to walk away. There's no reason for him to go back on the football field. But
yeah, I agree. I mean, I agree with all that. It is sad. Like, it's not what you want. This is not how you want it to play out. I want that to be very clear that I'm not saying the Saints are better without Alvin Kamara. I'm not saying the Saints are better without Cam Jordan or Demario Davis or Marshawn Lattimore or Tyrann Mathieu. Love these guys. All right. I am a fan of this team. I love this team. I love going to the games. I have watched every play of Alvin Kamara's career, most of them in person. All right. I'm as tied to this team as you can be. But Florio's right. Kamara is not playing next year under his current contract. Currently, it doesn't make any sense for the Saints to renegotiate an extension or something that would give Alvin the money he wants and the guaranteed money he wants and all of that. Why would the Saints do that in their current situation? Cam Jordan, agree. Like, Cam Jordan has seemingly hit a wall as far as his career and all that, and he probably will walk away. He's got his podcast. I think he would be good for TV. I think he could do the job. Marshawn Lattimore is under contract with the Saints, but is our probably best asset. You could probably get the most for Marshawn. Tyrann Mathieu getting older. Demario Davis getting older. Derek Carr, he's in that third year. He's entering the third year of his contract, and a contract that was set up to kind of have a team option for year 3, year 4. Carr's older. You don't really need a $100 million quarterback when you're rebuilding, and you have the 5th round rookie quarterback who you're trying to develop. So I hate it. It's not a fun conversation to have, but you kind of, this is where you got to do it, and you got to get whatever you can for these players.
But yeah, I think Alvin Kamara, I mean, you think about some of the teams that he can go to. There's a lot of teams that would love a guy like him. Think about the Kansas City Chiefs and what he can do in their offense. What's that?
The Chiefs don't really do this, I don't think the Chiefs would do this. I think he would fit the Chiefs perfect. But I mean, what about the San Francisco 49ers? That'd be interesting, right? Like the 49ers have McCaffrey. Will he play? What's his situation? Jordan Mason seemingly is hurt. You go get him. The Bengals, they're fine. You know, they have Zach Moss, Chase Brown. I'm trying to think of some other teams that could utilize a player like this. I mean, anyone can use Alvin Kamara for sure. For sure. That would be crazy if San Francisco made a move for him. But
I said, oh, God, just the thought of him with the Chiefs.
Yeah. I mean, and don't think that there's a lot of playoff contending teams that couldn't use a cornerback like a Marshawn Lattimore or even a Demario Davis. Some of these veteran players that are still good players that can play at a high level, you put them in a different situation, a different environment, it's just going to spark something. And I believe that Marshawn Lattimore or even Alvin Kamara, I love that pick by you because I think Alvin Kamara could walk right on the team right now
100%.
and be a huge difference
100%.
maker, in particular the Chiefs.
Well,
yeah, you have a team like the Eagles or somebody like that where it's like, hey, you go get a Marshawn Lattimore or Demario Davis and shore up a defense that was struggling. And yeah, I mean, those players, like the Saints have good players. That's what we were saying all offseason. You're talking about, you know, going into this season, you're talking about a guy in Demario Davis who's been playing at a top 10 linebacker his whole career, basically. Not this year, but you have Marshawn Lattimore who this year is playing like a top 5 cornerback. You have Tyrann Mathieu, who a lot of people think is a top 5, top 6 safety. I mean, there are players that can absolutely contribute to a playoff team.
And we think about the other contenders out there. This week, Brandon Beane was on Pat McAfee's show. The Bills GM said they're not done after adding Amari Cooper.
Yeah, the Bills lost their linebacker Milano 2 years in a row now. So the Bills are a team that could go get a Demario Davis and could really benefit from a player like that.
Could they? Now they have James Cook, and you know, it's not like it's a glaring need, but if somebody else might get him, maybe we should be in the mix. If the Chiefs are thinking about it, maybe we should try to get him. I always think of the Vikings because the rare season that Minnesota's actually
good example too. Like Minnesota, I know they have Aaron Jones who's hurt and they just got Cam Akers, but Alvin Kamara makes a lot of sense in the Minnesota offense as well.
Pretty good. How can they get better?
That pick. I love it.
They have Aaron Jones, but Aaron Jones already banged up.
Or Detroit, not for Alvin Kamara, but Detroit has defensive issues. What if Detroit solidified their defense with a Marshawn Lattimore or Demario Davis or Tyrann Mathieu?
You need a couple of guys. You need somebody who can step in.
Or Chase Young. Like Aiden Hutchinson just went down. They need edge support. Chase Young is not Aiden Hutchinson by any stretch of the imagination, but you know, you bring in you get Chase Young for a third or a fourth and bring in an extra rusher. A lot of these players make sense on a lot of teams.
Because you're putting a lot of eggs in one basket. We know how the running back position goes. The Cowboys, it might be a little too late for the Cowboys, Rodney.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Mike, let me just jump in. And a guy like Alvin, see, when you get a guy like Alvin Kamara, he can come in and he can play a similar role like Aaron Jones. You know, so when you have Aaron Jones and then you go from Aaron Jones to a 250-pound back, the offense changes. But if you're going from one body type to a very similar body type and style of play, now you can continue to run those plays in your offense and have success. I really like that. I like Alvin Kamara there to the Minnesota Vikings.
And I haven't had a chance to go through all 32 teams and say yes or no or maybe. One team that would be a little fascinating, I mentioned the Cowboys. How about the Commanders? The Commanders seem legit. They went into Baltimore and didn't get embarrassed. They can play with anyone. And Brian Robinson's been banged up. I know they have Austin Eckler, but if you could upgrade to an Alvin Kamara, I mean, we saw how good he was earlier this year. We saw what he did to the Dallas defense.
Oh, yeah.
The Cowboys really should be at the front of the line if they're serious about turning around this train wreck of a team they have. I just don't know that at this point Kamara is going to make a difference because he doesn't play defense. Maybe they should get Kamara and Lattimore and a few other guys if they really want to be a contender in Dallas.
No.
I mean, it's crazy because like think about how much better Dallas would be if they had Alvin, Marshawn, and Demario Davis. You know, like it's crazy how good the roster in certain areas. It's crazy how good the roster is in New Orleans, and it's just completely falling apart.
If I'm Kamara, I don't want to have any part of the Dallas Cowboys. I want to go somewhere where it's where it's a lot more structured and things a little bit more settled. I don't want any part of the Cowboys.
Hey, and one
What about
last guy
Denver?
to consider, one last team, one last destination. How about the Broncos?
Unbelievable.
Now,
Am I
their
on a different
offense is
level or am I on a
rounding into
different
form,
level?
But Sean Payton's the guy that
Yeah, I think Alvin would be great in Denver. I mean, I think he's way better than Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin, and Payton knows how to use them. He trusts Payton. You know, Bo Nix could use a guy like Kamara. Hell yeah.
discovered Kamara, basically. He fell to round 3. Payton knew how good he was going to be. Going into the 2017 draft, Payton knew how good Patrick Mahomes was going to be, and he knew how
Lamar
good
Jackson.
Alvin Kamara was going to be. And he almost got Mahomes. But for Andy Reid trading up to 10, when the Saints are sitting there at 11, and Drew Brees is in the draft room, and they had to go tell somebody, hey, Drew, you're here with some of your friends. You know, we might take a quarterback here, just so you're aware of how this can go. And they would have, I believe, but for the trade by the Chiefs. It took Lattimore instead. But it was Mahomes and Kamara that Payton was smitten with. And so if Kamara is available and the Broncos a playoff contender right now, you plug him right into that offense. It's not like it's going to be a massive adjustment for Kamara because he knows exactly what Sean Payton does, and he can make a more seamless transition there than he would in other places.
And it shows a lot of versatility with Kamara, the fact that we've named 3 teams that we.
Yeah, man, like Alvin Kamara fits the current landscape of the NFL perfectly. Like he fits. You could slot him into so many teams. I mean, I know these teams have running backs, but the Rams and the Dolphins and like he just does what the current NFL wants their running backs to do. He is perfect for those kind of schemes. Absolutely perfect. I mean, I can't even imagine what he would do if he was on the 49ers. They would be out of control. If Christian McCaffrey, I mean, I'm sure they're fine with Jordan Mason if McCaffrey can't go, but man,
we can just pick him and just plug him right in. And the Denver Broncos, I like that too because it's an ideal situation because he goes back to a guy that knows him extremely well. He's very comfortable. And this is a guy that can catch the ball out of the backfield. He can run in between the tackles, and he'll be running behind a better, healthier offensive line, a better defense, just a better overall situation. Alvin Kamara, he's done so much for that organization. They should be willing to let him walk if he demanded a trade. And if they didn't want to trade me, maybe if I'm Alvin Kamara, I say, you know what? I want to be on a team that's competitive. I want to be in the playoffs. That's how you make your name big. That's how you grow your legacy, is by playing in those playoff games, those meaningful games in January and February. And if you don't play in those games, it's like people forget about you. And even if you're a good player, people start to say, well, maybe he's getting a little older. You want to be relevant as a player, and you need to go somewhere where they can use you. And we talked about Minnesota. We talked about the Broncos. What is the other team that we talked about? Kansas
Chiefs.
City.
You were the first one to say the Chiefs, yeah.
Yep. So, yeah, I mean, all of that should be consideration, Mike.
And really, Kamara hasn't been regarded as a superstar since Drew Brees retired and then Payton leaves and the Saints haven't been relevant. And I'll save it for another day to delve deeply into the question of whether or not Dennis Allen is in danger to not be back next year. Let's just say they need to win some games down the stretch. He's got 1 year left on his contract. The Saints pride themselves on continuity. They don't make rash decisions. But at some point, you got to do something.
Yeah, man. I mean, I don't think this is a rash decision. Like, they've given him 2.5 years into this, right? There was already these conversations last year. And it was like, all right, fire Carmichael in the offseason, okay. But, I mean, the understanding was, like, Dennis, like, you're going to have to turn this thing around. So, I don't think it is a rash decision to fire Allen now. And, if the Saints turned this around and won 9 games, I would be the most surprised person on the planet right now. So I don't think there's any way he's back next year if they do keep him. If Dennis Allen is the head coach of this team for the remainder of this season, I would think he is fired the day after the season ends, because it's just it's an impossibility that they would bring him back.
At some point, it's not working. At some point, if the fans get too loud, or they become apathetic and they just don't care anymore and they stop showing up, or they're showing up with bags on their heads like they're already starting to do. That's when you got to think about, what do we do next? Where do we go from here?
We got to talk about it,
win.
Mike, we got to talk about it, because I don't think it's fair if we don't talk about it. You think about a young quarterback and he's got a defensive-minded coach. The defense is one of the worst defenses in the league. They give up a lot of big plays. They're not very disciplined. So you look at the head coach and say, well, if we have a defensive-minded head coach, the defense should be a lot better. It's one of the worst defenses in the league. So what are you going to do? You're going to continue to stay with that defensive-minded coach, or are you going to go and look for another quarterback and get an offensive-minded coach to be able to work with that quarterback?
Well, I mean, that's kind of problematic, though, because, like you have Clint Kubiak, you have Janocko, you have his staff. I think they're fine. I don't think you get rid of them. So bringing in an offensive coach may not be the answer. I think you have to bring in a defensive-minded coach, and you have to continue. And that's if you want to go with Rattler. If you do not want to go with Rattler moving forward, and you plan on drafting a quarterback or trading for a quarterback or signing, however you plan on doing it, that could change things, But I guess that's like a different decision tree of, would you keep Rattler and let Kubiak and Janocko kind of see what they can do with him, or do you completely pivot to drafting a quarterback? And this is not a very good quarterback draft. Like, this is a weak quarterback draft. So then, do you take a different player this year? Do you take a lineman or whatever, and then next year you hope to land a quarterback? I don't know. It's because, I mean, like, how good do we really think the Cam Ward, Quinn Ewers, Shedeur Sanders, like, how good do we think those quarterbacks are? I mean, Carson Beck and Jackson Dart and Riley Leonard. Like, I don't really think any of those guys are. Like, you don't think of any of those guys like, yep, okay, that's the franchise guy. So, and we need a whole lot, especially if we're rebuilding. So you just draft like a best player available, and then in the following year, you hope to draft one, or does Rattler take a step? I mean, it's just a lot.
Because at the end of the day, that's what we're seeing more of. We're not seeing all these defensive coordinators being hired. We're seeing more offensive-minded guys being hired to be connected with the quarterback. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, with 1 year left on his contract, no new extension in sight, that they can move on from Dennis Allen.
The key is they got to get Derek Carr back. You look at the earlier games this year, after those 2 wins, they lost by 3 against the Eagles. They lost by 2 to the Falcons. They were kind of toe-to-toe, or at least they were scratching back into it with the Chiefs on that Monday night before Carr got injured. It hasn't gone well since then. The schedule is not Murderer's Row.
Yeah, it's not, but okay, like, so you go to the Chargers, all right? Then you play at Carolina. Difficult travel there. So Carr is supposed to be back week 9. He's supposed to be back at Carolina. Let's say you drop the game to the Chargers. All right, you're 2-6. It's not Murderer's Row, but we are absolutely dogs to the Falcons. We're absolutely dogs to probably the Rams, the Commanders, the Packers, the Bucks. The Raiders and the Browns are like the 2 games, and the Panthers are the 3 games where it's like, okay, we should probably win this game. But if we're playing the way we are playing defensively, Nick Chubb is going to have a field day. The Rams are going to, I mean, that is a worst case scenario, is facing that team with a leaky run defense. So, like, what's best case scenario? Best case scenario, I think, is you beat the Panthers, so 3, you beat the Browns 4, you beat the Giants 5, beat the Raiders 6. I mean, is 6 wins like best case scenario? Like, maybe you beat the Falcons at home, but that's a big ask. Like, I just don't. And it just depends on like how healthy we get, how fast. Like, if Carr was playing this week, Carr's back, Olave's back. Like, okay, maybe we can give the Chargers a game, but again, it has nothing to do with our offense. Like, unless Derek Carr is playing defensive tackle, like, I still think J.K. Dobbins is going to have 150 yards rushing. I still think Nick Chubb's going to have 150 yards rushing. I still think the Rams are going to do whatever they want, just play action us to death. Like, so what in the world would make me think that a change at quarterback is all of a sudden going to fix our biggest problem, which is that we can't get the other team off the field
the rest of the way for the Saints? There are winnable games if and when Carr is back, at the Chargers, at the Panthers. Yeah, the Falcons won't be easy, but that's a division rival that they can beat and almost did when they went to Atlanta. The Browns before the bye week, down the stretch, Commanders, Packers, sure, at Buccaneers to finish the season, but they can still. They're not
week 14,
cooked.
Mike, look at week 14 to week 18. Look at that. Look what they got to deal with. Look at what they got to deal with. They got to deal with a Giants team that's a lot better on the defensive side of the ball. They got to deal with the Commanders, who's playing. Jaden Daniels playing terrific. Green Bay has been very balanced this year. The Raiders is a wild card.
The only thing we can hope for this Buccaneers game is that the Buccaneers have already clinched like the division and they're playing nobody, and we're just playing like a backup Bucs team. But I mean, like, we have to win. Like, I mean, really, like, we have 2 wins. So how do we get to 8 wins? You're telling me we're going to win 6 of these games? We're going to beat the Chargers, the Panthers, the Falcons, the Browns, the Giants, and the Raiders. That's the 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, those are the 6 games. Potentially the Buccaneers if they're playing nobody. Like, doesn't that sound insane? Dude, I sound like a crazy person sitting here saying like, oh yeah, we'll win 6 of these games.
But the Buccaneers, they're going to come and play. So, I mean, it's not an easy schedule, the back end of their schedule. So, yeah, They get a little break playing against the Chargers.
The easy part is here. Like, the easy part was Bucs at home, Broncos at home. And we got destroyed in those games.
Maybe in the Panthers and the Browns, but that back half of that schedule at the end is deadly.
Now, look, there's 2 games left until the trade deadline. And back to Kamara, there was some friction in the offseason. He left mandatory minicamp. He wanted to take that contract that necessarily does require the Saints to tear it up after the season and move on and turn it into an extension. So there's been some heat there between the Saints and Kamara. It will be interesting to see. Now that he has witnessed Davante Adams blaze a path out of Las Vegas and Amari Cooper escape the penitentiary that is the Cleveland Browns right now, will he be jostling the next couple of weeks to get out of New Orleans?
And remember, guys, remember what these teams are giving up. Like, Davante Adams, they traded him for a 4th-round pick. And yeah, it's conditional, but the conditions are that he is I think the conditions are that he's a first-team or second-team All-Pro, or if he plays in the AFC Championship game or the Super Bowl. So I don't think it's going to move up to a second round pick. So you're talking about Davante Adams, a 4th rounder. So it's not like we're getting 1st-round picks for these players. You have to be comfortable with parting with Alvin Kamara for a 3rd round and a 4th round, or 2/3 or 2 whatever. Like, it's not going to be 1st and 2nd rounds. So make sure we'll understand that, because a lot of people were telling me Davante Adams. I know a lot of Raiders fans watch the channel, and a lot of people were saying that the Raiders should get a 1st. And it's like, that's so far away from what the market is. I mean, they got a 4th-round pick. I know Davante's older and he hasn't been as good, but still, a 4th rounder.
They win the next 2.
Like, Davante Adams went for less than Chase Young. Like, Chase Young was traded for a 3rd.
Trade deadline comes, you're 4-5. It's kind of hard to justify making that move. But these are things to watch, because number 1, they got to get Derek Carr back. And then number 2, they got to win some football games. And number 3, we've talked enough about that. I can't believe we milked 27 minutes out of that game last night. Hi, it's Mike Florio.
There you go. All right. What do y'all think? I mean, it's tough. It is a tough conversation to have, but it's real. And the conversation should be being had. So let me know what you think. Do you think the Saints should trade players? Who should they trade? What would be the landing spots? And what would you want to get for in return? Thank you very much for watching. I will see you in the next video.